Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. Dave Martinez, the Interstate 80 Phantom trucker, had been operating 18-wheelers for 23 years, transporting anything from livestock to electronics over the nation's roadways. On the road, he had witnessed his fair share of oddities: drunk drivers, potentially fatal weather, and other truckers who had gone insane due to amphetamines and solitude. However, he had been unprepared for what transpired on Interstate 80. In the winter of 2019, it began with the talk on the CB radio. When Dave first learned about the Phantom trucker, he was traveling across Nebraska in the dead of night while transporting a shipment of auto components from Detroit to Sacramento. A strange semi that had been seen on I-84 weeks always at night, always by itself, and always driving erratically was the topic of conversation among other cars. The truck would show up in the driver's mirrors, occasionally darting between lanes without any discernible pattern, and other times tailgating dangerously close. Near North Platte, the insane son of a underscore almost ran me off the road. A voice crackled over the CB, with a sleeper cab, Big Pete. No signs of the company. The driver appeared to be hunched over the wheel. Dave grew increasingly uneasy as he heard the reports. The identical car, a dark blue Peterbilt 379 with a damaged front bumper and what looked to be an unconscious or sleeping driver, was recounted by other drivers. The truck would emerge out of nowhere, drive 4 miles after other cars, and then disappear into the night. The allegations that the vehicle appeared to be driving itself and that the driver was standing still behind the wheel were the most unsettling. Dave met the Phantom trucker himself 3 nights later. It was about 2 a.m. when he approached the Ogallala rest spot. Suddenly his side mirror showed headlights. He was being rapidly overtaken by another lorry. Too quickly for the slippery conditions, Dave looked across and felt his blood run cold as the truck drove alongside. The truck kept its exact lane position and matched Dave's pace, even though the driver was slouched forward with his head resting against the steering wheel. Dave reached for his CB. Roadrunner is breaker 1N on eastbound I-80. Mile marker 126. I saw a driver in difficulties. The truck is still rolling even though it appears that he is unconscious. After standing next to Dave for about 5 minutes, the enigmatic semi moved slowly forward and vanished into the night. Reaching for his coffee thermos, Dave's hands trembled as he tried to process what he had seen. Dave reported the incident to the Nebraska State Patrol over the phone the following morning. The dispatcher appeared unsurprised by the report, but he accepted his information kindly. She acknowledged that we've had multiple calls regarding this car. Units have searched for it, but it seems to simply disappear. Dave was unaware that victims had already been claimed by the Phantom trucker. A family of 4 had been slain 2 weeks prior when their minivan struck a scimitar that had abruptly drifted into their lane close to the Wyoming border. Witnesses reported a dark blue Peterbilt with front-end damage, but the truck driver had left the area. The car was never located. 3. Another event happened a few days after Dave's experience. Officer Janet Mills, a state trooper from Nebraska, saw the Phantom trucker coming up behind her while she was doing a routine traffic check. In a 75-bag zone, the semi was weaving slightly between lanes at about 85 miles per hour. Mills followed right away, but the vehicle seemed to accelerate uncontrollably and vanished over a hill. Despite following the truck's likely path and calling for backup, Mills was unable to locate it. But she found something that chilled her to the bone. At the next truck stop, 3 hours prior, a trucker had fallen in the parking lot. According to the manager, behind the wheel of his dark blue Peterbilt 379 rig, he had been discovered unconscious. After being taken to the hospital, the man's doctors concluded that he had suffered a severe stroke. As soon as the truck was impounded, Mills noticed damage to the front end. However, she discovered something impractical when she looked at the time frame. The driver of the vehicle was receiving medical attention in the hospital emergency room when the truck was reported to be traveling on I-80. An even more horrifying truth came to light throughout the investigation. Robert Chen, the truck driver, had been, despite having basic motor functions, he lost consciousness while driving due to an unidentified medical ailment, a rare neurological condition called autopilot syndrome or automatic behavior. Chen had been almost sleepwalking hundreds of miles for weeks. In some way, his unconscious consciousness was still in charge of the enormous car. However, the mystery became more complex when detectives looked into Chen's GPS data and logbook. According to the records, the truck had been in areas Chen couldn't have been, and occasionally it seemed to be in 2 places at once. Images of the phantom trucker were taken by security cameras at different truck stops, while Chen was being recorded elsewhere. When investigators learned that Chen had been utilizing a highly advanced cruise control system in conjunction with lane-keeping technology modifications that weren't totally permitted for commercial vehicles, the case took an even more sinister turn. Even when Chen was unconscious, the truck drove semi-autonomously due to a defective mechanism. For months, the highway was plagued with a rolling death trap that was exacerbated by his medical condition. Dave Martinez's experience with the ghost trucker was one he would never forget. Dave couldn't get rid of the picture of that still driver even after Chen was taken into custody and his truck was permanently seized. He has discovered the distinction between technology, and he had never realized the thinness of human cognition, and that the scariest monsters on America's roads weren't supernatural. The ones we made ourselves were those. Despite the fact that the phantom trucker on Interstate 80 had been stopped, every driver who had come into contact with him was still terrified. All of them had seen something that made them question what they thought was possible. Sometimes, the most horrific stories are the ones that are utterly terrifyingly real. According to A Ghost in the Machine, one of the most peculiar traffic accidents in Nebraska's history is still this one. A warning that reality can be scarier than any urban legend on the endless American highways. To the sound that follows in his 15 years of cross-country traveling, Marcus Thompson had never encountered anything remotely similar to what transpired on Highway 50 across Nevada in the summer of 2021. There was a sound at the beginning of the occurrence, a low mechanical humming that simultaneously seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. The time was 3:47 a.m. Marcus's initial observation. He was traveling across the Nevada desert on America's most desolate highway, carrying a consignment of frozen products from Portland to Phoenix. The only company he had was the unending blackness punctuated by his headlights, and the CB radio had been silent for hours. He heard it at that point. His truck's cab seemed to tremble with a loud, resonant hum. Marcus initially assumed it was a mechanical issue. Having driven the same Kenworth for 8 years, he was familiar with all of its noises. One of them wasn't this. When he saw the next truck, he stopped. Halt, a desolate outpost known as Desert, rose and examined his exhaust system, engine, and transmission for an hour. Everything appeared flawless. Within minutes, the humming was back on the road. His truck wasn't the source. It followed him as he drove, coming from outside. Marcus thought it might be interference, so he tried adjusting his radio, but the sound continued even after he turned the radio off entirely. There was nothing but empty desert all around him, but there was something odd about the buzzing, almost like a huge engine idling out in the distance. The highway was practically empty, but Marcus kept checking his mirrors for other cars. Nevertheless, the sound persisted, precisely keeping pace with his pace. Approximately 5 in the morning, Marcus he grabbed his CB radio. Desert Fox, is breaker 1 to 19. Does anyone else have the strange humming noise on Highway 50? Static crackled on the radio. Then a voice spoke. This is Knight Rider. Desert Fox, what's that humming noise? As Marcus continued to drive, other voices joined the conversation, and to more truckers, both behind him on the same stretch of highway, reported hearing the same sound. It's like there's a huge generator running somewhere, one driver said. But I can't see anything out here. Knight Rider, another trucker, who was about 20 miles ahead, said he wasn't hearing anything unusual. Another reported the mysterious humming about an hour ago for me. I assumed it was my engine, but everything checks out. Throughout the night, more drivers reported the mysterious humming. But this is what really scared me. It seemed to be following certain truckers, while utterly avoiding others. As dawn drew near, Marcus discovered that the humming wasn't just following him, but also affecting the performance of his truck. His engine started to work harder, as if pulling against some invisible resistance, and his fuel consumption increased dramatically. While other drivers on the same stretch of highway were tormented by the unrelenting mechanical drone, others heard nothing. Marcus was not alone in experiencing these mechanical issues. Other truckers affected by the sound reported similar problems, including increased engine strain, electrical malfunctions, and navigation systems that appeared to be receiving signals from somewhere else entirely. Most disturbing of all, his GPS system began to malfunction, displaying his location as several miles off the highway in areas where there were no roads. When Marcus arrived in Las Vegas and pulled over at a truck stop to fill up his tank, he checked his engine and met Carlos, another driver who had seen the same thing 3 months earlier on the same section of highway. Carlos' theory, what's out there in that desert, he asked, barely raising his voice above a whisper, is military stuff, testing grounds. The Nevada desert was home to many classified military installations and testing facilities, some of which had been experimenting with long-range acoustic weapons and electromagnetic pulse devices designed to disable enemy intelligence. Carlos explained that he had conducted research following his own encounter, and that they had been experimenting with electromagnetic weapons, sonic devices, things that can mess with your head and your equipment. The government doesn't want you to know about it, Carlos added, but they've been testing these weapons on civilian vehicles. Truckers make perfect test subjects. We're isolated. We're moving through empty areas, and if something goes wrong, who's going to believe us? At first, Marcus dismissed Carlos's theory as conspiracy nonsense. But the more he considered it, the more he understood that the humming sound, the mechanical issues, the GPS malfunctions, all of this could be explained by some sort of directed energy weapon or sonic device being tested on unwary drivers. Marcus needed the work, and he was afraid, but he had to make the return trip the following night through the same section of Nevada highway. The humming began at nearly the same spot as before, but this time Marcus was ready, so he turned on his recording equipment and started recording everything. He brought a digital recorder, a backup GPS unit, and a camera to capture any unusual sounds. His truck's engine started working harder right away, and his primary GPS system began displaying impossible locations. But the backup GPS worked flawlessly, confirming that his truck was exactly where it should be on Highway 50. It was more intense than before, a deep penetrating hum that seemed to resonate through his entire body, proving that something was specifically targeting his primary navigation system with some sort of electronic interference. The most terrifying moment occurred when Marcus noticed lights in his rearview mirror. As he drove through the affected area, his radio picked up strange transmissions, not CB chatter, but what sounded like military communications using coded language. Electronics experts would later analyze the recordings he made that night and confirm that the audio contained frequencies typically associated with military acoustic weapons testing. Marcus never reported the incident to authorities because he knew they wouldn't believe him, and he suspected they might already know about it. Instead, he saw headlights and strange pulsing lights that seemed to be following him from a distance, slowing down when he slowed down and speeding up when he accelerated. The lights followed him for more than an hour before finally going away as he reached the edge of the affected area. Instead, he distributed his recordings to other truckers via CB radio networks and internet forums. Before long, a pattern was apparent. Dozens of drivers had encountered the same thing on isolated routes in New Mexico, Nevada, and Utah, all states with heavy military populations. The sound that the trucking community created its own unofficial warning system using CB codes to notify other drivers about areas where the humming had been reported. Marcus never drove through that stretch of Nevada again, but occasionally on calm nights when he's driving through other areas, some drivers started carrying electromagnetic detection equipment to keep an eye out for unusual signals, and others started avoiding certain routes completely. Somewhere in the American desert, invisible forces are testing weapons that could turn any highway into a testing ground, and the most terrifying part is that it's all completely legal. Classified research that treats American truckers as unwitting test subjects for the next generation of military technology. He still listens carefully for that familiar hum in remote areas. The sound that follows isn't anything out of the ordinary. After 18 years of driving ice roads in northern Canada and Alaska, Tommy Kowalski believed he had seen it all. He had survived blizzards that could bury a truck in minutes. He had navigated frozen lakes where the ice moaned like a living thing beneath his wheels, and he had experienced the kind of isolation that could drive a man insane. But nothing prepared him for what happened during the winter of 2020 on the Dalton Highway, Alaska's most dangerous highway. Truckers were talking about colleagues who appeared to be driving in a trance-like state, responding to radio calls, but speaking in monotone voices, making strange decisions that put everyone at risk. And Tommy first heard about it over the CB radio while hauling drilling equipment to Prudhoe Bay. "I saw Big Mike yesterday," a voice over the CB crackled. In the middle of a snowstorm, he was driving with his headlights off. When I radioed him, he simply said, following the lights over and over. It made no sense, and Tommy wrote it off. As normal ice road banter drivers became strange when they spent too much time in the Arctic isolation, that the reports continued to come in. At least a dozen truckers reported what other truckers called ice road syndrome, a sort of waking sleep state, in which drivers continued to drive but seemed to be following some invisible guidance that no one else could see. The phenomenon appeared to be spreading as truckers were seen driving erratically, taking dangerous shortcuts across unstable ice, or simply stopping their trucks in the middle of the highway and sitting motionless for hours. Tommy's first direct encounter occurred on his third trip north that winter. As the weather cleared, Tommy was able to see the truck more clearly. It was a red Peterbilt owned by a driver named Frank Russo, whom Tommy had known for years. But Frank was driving with his windows down in -40 weather, and Tommy could see that the driver was weaving a little, not dangerous enough to be drunk, but strange enough to be concerning. He was driving through a whiteout situation near Coldfoot when he noticed another truck ahead of him. That Frank's eyes were completely unfocused, staring straight ahead as if he were looking at something far away, and that his lips were moving all the time, as if he was speaking to someone. Tommy honked his horn and pulled alongside Frank's truck, and when Frank turned to face Tommy, Tommy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic air. Tommy yelled over the CB, Frank, you okay, buddy?" Frank's voice returned over the radio, but it sounded odd, flat, and emotionless. "Following the lights, Tommy. Can't you see them? They're so beautiful, Tommy looked ahead, but all he saw was the endless white expanse of the ice road. What lights, Frank? There's nothing out there. The sky was overcast and it was midday when Tommy watched in horror as Frank's truck started to veer off the road, heading straight toward a section of unstable ice that had been marked with warning signs. The aurora, Frank said in that same monotone voice, is calling us home. However, Tommy could see no aurora. As the rescue team arrived from Fairbanks, they assisted in blocking Frank's path and forcing him to stop. When they got to Frank's truck, they discovered him sitting behind the wheel, completely unresponsive, his eyes open, but not responding to their voices or physical contact, as if he were in a deep trance. The paramedic explained that Frank was suffering from a condition known as Arctic psychosis or polar madness. The paramedic described the phenomenon as a psychological phenomenon that occurs when people are exposed to extreme cold and isolation for extended periods of time. It's like the cold gets inside your head and rewires your perception, causing you to see things that aren't there, hear voices, and feel compelled to follow imaginary lights or sounds. However, what made this outbreak unique was how contagious it seemed. A growing number of ice road truckers developed the same symptoms over the course of the following weeks, driving 4 hours on end, while seemingly asleep, taking routes that made no sense, and always claiming they were following the lights or heading home. The phenomenon peaked in horror when a convoy of 6 trucks was discovered abandoned on a remote stretch of ice road, all of them in a perfect circle, facing inward with their headlights still on. Search teams eventually found the drivers 3 miles away, walking in single file across the frozen wilderness, all of them sporting the same expressionless face Tommy had noticed on Frank's. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist with expertise in extreme environment psychology, was brought in to investigate the outbreak, and her findings were Dr. Chen explained. The combination of sensory deprivation, extreme cold isolation, and the unique visual effects of the Arctic environment creates a perfect storm for a psychological breakdown. The impacted drivers all displayed symptoms of shared psychotic episodes, a rare condition in which multiple people start experiencing the same delusions and hallucinations. What we're seeing is a form of mass hysteria adapted to extreme environmental conditions, she said. Most likely, a number of things combined to produce the lights that the drivers reported seeing. Visual illusions produced by ice crystals in the atmosphere, vitamin D deficiencies, psychological impacts, and the brain's propensity to invent meaning and patterns where none exist, through CB radio talks, when drivers unintentionally impacted one another's views. The delusion's shared nature grew. However, Dr. Chen's investigation turned up something even more disturbing. There was more to the ice road sleepwalkers than just sight. They were all going to the same place, a far-flung region of the Arctic Ocean with no facilities, no roads, and no reason why anyone should travel there. Unusual geometric patterns in the local ice formations were visible on satellite images. Natural structures that yet had the appearance of gathering spots or landing strips. When the trucking companies instituted new safety procedures, required rest breaks, psychiatric assessments, and above all radio silence on specific sections of the ice roads, the outbreak was ultimately halted. The psychological link between the impacted drivers was severed when the CB talk that had been disseminating the common beliefs was silenced. Tommy was never a driver. The ice highways once more following that winter, he had witnessed far too many skilled drivers go nuts due to the Arctic's frigid temperatures, as the unending white space gradually drove them insane. Frank's voice over the CB, however, disturbed him the most because he was so sure that he was following lovely lights home. Sleepwalkers on the ice road were a known psychological phenomenon. However, they stood for something to Tommy more horrifying. The understanding that pushing people to their maximum limits renders reality itself untrustworthy. The distinction between what is real and what is imagined completely vanishes in the most isolated places on Earth, where the cold can kill you in a matter of minutes and the loneliness can drive you insane. Your ability to trust your own senses is frozen in the Arctic, in addition to your physical body. Additionally, for the drivers who encountered those common delusions, the question still stands: were they all seeing something that the rest of us were just unable to notice, or were they actually hallucinating? The most terrifying fact of all is that distinction loses all meaning amid the infinite white emptiness of the ice roadways. For Ray Gutierrez, the memory thief had spent 12 years traveling the same route, transporting electronics along Arizona's and New Mexico's arid roadways from Phoenix to Denver, and back Colorado as well. He was familiar with all of the road's curves, rest areas, and mile markers. He realized something was very wrong in the spring of 2022, when he began to lose significant amounts of time while driving. There were tiny gaps at first. Ray would recall leaving a truck stop in Flagstaff, but he would lose all recollection of the drive 2 hours later. The times in his logbook were accurate, despite his truck showing no signs of mechanical issues and his GPS tracking his path normally. Ray couldn't get rid of the notion that something had happened during those hours he couldn't recall. On a Thursday evening in April, the first significant occurrence took place. Ray discovered his gasoline gauge was significantly lower than it should have been when traveling through the Navajo Nation in northeastern Arizona. His GPS indicated that he had maintained on his usual route, but his trip computer indicated that he had traveled an additional 200 meters. Ray checked his logbook after pulling over. He had no recollection of making such entries, yet everything appeared to be in his own handwriting and looked normal. It was then that he saw the pictures on his phone. Dozens of photographs he had never shot, of places he had never seen. Strange symbols carved into stone, rock formations, and desert landscapes. Timestamps revealed that Ray had no memory of stopping. His truck was stepping out to snap pictures, although they were taken during the time he was missing. Ray began to hear similar reports from other vehicles over the CB radio. Truck drivers reported losing time, finding objects in their cabs that they couldn't explain, and finding proof of activities they couldn't recall. Drivers who traveled through particular regions of Arizona and New Mexico appeared to be affected by the phenomenon, which appeared to be spreading along particular routes through the southwestern desert. I don't recall writing anything in the notepad I found in my sleeper bed, but I did report one driver over the CB using my handwriting. It appears to be some sort of journal, but it's about people and places I've never been, in an attempt to document what was occurring during his blackouts. Ray began to operate a digital recorder during his drives. Something extremely unsettling was exposed by the tapes. Ray kept driving and even answered CB radio calls during his absence, but his voice sounded distinct, as though he were reading from a script, flat and mechanical. Meeting Navajo Nation member and neurologist Dr. Michael Standing Bear, who had been researching instances similar to Ray's, was the turning point. According to Dr. Standing Bear, Ray and the other impacted drivers were suffering from an extreme form of a malady known as highway hypnosis. In essence, your brain is switching to automatic mode. But something in this setting is causing a far deeper state than usual highway hypnosis, Dr. Standing Bear observed. Your subconscious keeps working, following patterns and routines you've built over years of driving, while your conscious mind shuts down totally. Standing Bear's investigation uncovered something more sinister. The impacted drivers weren't simply losing time, but were being impacted by something in the environment itself. The doctor had found that some parts of the desert had anomalous electromagnetic fields, which can disrupt brain function and may be brought on by underground mineral deposits and particular geological formations. They're basically putting your brain into a programmable state. Dr. Standing Bear went on. Your mind is vulnerable to outside stimuli, including sounds, visual patterns, and even radio frequencies, while you are in this hypnotic state. Important evidence was presented by Ray's recordings. The audio captured odd low-frequency noises that were not perceptible to the conscious mind during his blackout episodes, but could impact conduct. Subliminal signals and directives were also discovered in patterns of CB radio talk, which were seemingly random chats between truckers. When Dr. Standing Bear examined the pictures Ree had shot during his blackouts, he made the most horrifying revelation. The photos displayed areas that were a part of a government project that was categorized as an underground research facility, and that was investigating the electromagnetic field's influence on human behavior. In reality, the symbols and rock formations Ree had captured on camera were covert monitoring devices intended to blend in with the desert's natural landscape. Dr. Standing Bear disclosed that you and the other drivers had been unintentional test subjects. These electromagnetic fields have been used by someone to investigate how human behavior can be altered. You are led to designated areas, given duties to complete, and then your memories are suppressed during your blackout intervals. Ray's research revealed additional impacted drivers, and the two of them started piecing together the experiment's entire scope. Truckers were being employed as test subjects because they were ideal for secret behavioral research, because they took dependable routes through isolated locations. The unexplained actions, the memory gaps, and the missing time were all components of a methodical program intended to test the boundaries of electromagnetic control of the mind. In addition to being untraceable, the evidence was overwhelming. Officially, the research site Ree had taken pictures of was a geological survey station. It is possible to attribute the electromagnetic anomalies to natural events. One may write off the CB radio patterns as coincidences. Those who attempted to report the experiences were classified as having hallucinations brought on by exhaustion. Although Ree ceased using the impacted routes, the harm had already been done. He started to have flashbacks, which were abrupt, intense, memories of things he had done when he was having blackouts. He recalled being led to particular spots, gathering soil samples, taking pictures of tools, and even running into strangers. Even though these retrieved memories were jumbled and surreal, they felt absolutely authentic. In the most unsettling recollection, Ree was meeting a man wearing a white lab coat who had shown him a number of pictures and urged him to do certain things. Ray recalled being utterly obedient and powerless to object or question what was taking place. He would not remember any of it when he woke up, the man had claimed, adding that Ray was assisting with crucial research. In the end, Dr. Understanding Bear's research was formally discontinued because of financial limitations. However, Ree had a suspicion that the true cause was that his investigation had become too near to reality. The impacted truckers were counseled to seek therapy for stress-related sleep disorders after the electromagnetic abnormalities were discreetly categorized as natural phenomena that didn't need any additional investigation. Ree never again drove on those desolate roads. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that unwary tourists were still being experimented on by invisible powers somewhere in the American Southwest. Anyone who drove across its realm was still being robbed of time and consciousness by the memory thief. The knowledge that Ray's psyche had been totally raped was the most horrifying part of the entire ordeal. Utilized as a tool for objectives he was unable to recall or comprehend, he had been transformed into a puppet that served unidentified masters. All the while thinking he was just on his usual path. Ree frequently pondered the number of other drivers who were still operating vehicles, wasting time on the freeways, and performing enigmatic duties they would never recall. The memory thief had demonstrated to him that the human mind was far more susceptible than he had previously thought, and that consciousness itself could be taken and altered amid the wide emptiness of the American desert by powers he couldn't understand. The desert retains its secrets, some of which are so deeply ingrained in human consciousness that the victims themselves will never be aware of what has been stolen. 5. The frequency. When the headache began, Jake Morrison had been transporting freight throughout the Midwest for 9 years. He initially believed it to be the result of excessive caffeine and the strain of long drives. However, by 2023, the agony was intolerable. A high-pitched ringing in his ears that seemed to originate from both everywhere and nowhere at once was always there, along with sharp stabbing sensations that seemed like someone was driving an icy pick through his skull. What was odd was that the headaches only happened in certain places. While running regularly along Interstate 35 from Chicago to Kansas City, Jake became aware of the pattern. Each time the discomfort would begin when you went along a specific section of highway close to the Iowa-Mississippi line. As he got closer to mile marker 87, it would progressively intensify, reach a crescendo that left him queasy and lightheaded, and then subside as he moved south. Jake wasn't by alone. Similar symptoms were reported over the CB radio by other truckers traveling the same route. The grievances were consistently the same. A high-pitched voice that sounded like it was drilling into their brains was accompanied by sudden, intense headaches. Some motorists claimed to have seen light flashes that weren't there. Others said they felt as though their minds were being jumbled. One driver complained over the CB that it felt like someone was broadcasting straight into their brain. "I can't think well because the sound gets so loud. Last week, I believed I was having a stroke and had to pull over twice." Truckers came to refer to the phenomena as the frequency, an enigmatic signal that appeared to target particular cars passing through the impacted area. It was even more unnerving because not all drivers experienced it. While the severe pain and auditory hallucinations might render some people unable of driving, others would pass along the same section of roadway without any issues. Jake started recording his experiences, recording each episode's precise times, locations, and level of severity. He found that between 2 a.m. and 2 a.m., the frequency was highest, m, and 4 a.m. It appeared to be more severe in specific weather circumstances, especially when there was low cloud cover and high humidity. Jake's encounter with Doctor was the turning point. Lisa Hartman is an acoustics engineer who focuses on researching how infrasound affects people's health. The trucker's stories captivated Dr. Hartman, who had been looking into reports of unexplained ailments in remote areas. "What you're describing sounds like exposure to focused infrasound," Dr. Hartman clarified. "These are waves of sound below." Dr. Hartman's investigation showed that the affected stretch of highway was situated directly between two large wind farms, and that when the turbines were operating under certain atmospheric conditions, they could produce standing wave patterns of infrasound that focused on the highway like an invisible beam of sound waves. Infrasound can cause headaches, nausea, disorientation, and even hallucinations. Acoustic energy. But when Dr. Hartman examined the frequency patterns Jake had captured, the mystery became even more complex. The infrasound wasn't random. It had clear patterns and modulations that indicated it was being amplified or produced artificially, and the bass was coming from the wind turbines. After analyzing the data, Dr. Hartman informed Jake that this isn't natural. Someone is using the wind farms as a cover for acoustic weapons testing. The turbines provide the perfect explanation for any sound-related phenomena, but the actual source is something much more sophisticated. Jake's investigation revealed that something else was controlling and directing the sound waves. The truckers passing through the area were unwitting test subjects, providing data from a classified research facility hidden among the wind turbines. From the outside, the facility appeared to be a wind farm maintenance building, but satellite imagery revealed a complex array of acoustic equipment and directional speakers designed to focus and amplify specific frequencies. The facility was conducting experiments in long-range acoustic weapons, devices that could incapacitate or disorient from miles away without leaving any physical evidence. Regarding the efficacy of various frequency combinations and targeting techniques, the most unsettling feature of the study was its selectivity. The acoustic weapons were made to target specific individuals based on biological characteristics, such as heart rate, brainwave patterns, and even genetic markers, which accounted for why some drivers felt the frequency, while others did not. The psychological effects were as devastating as the physical ones. Jake found that the targeting system was extremely sophisticated, using biometric scanners integrated into way stations, facial recognition software, and even analysis of CB radio voice patterns to identify and track individual drivers. Once a driver was chosen as a test subject, the system would follow their route and activate the acoustic weapons at predetermined locations. In addition to chronic headaches that persisted 4 weeks after exposure, drivers who experienced the frequency reported persistent anxiety, insomnia, and a constant sense of being watched. Others reported memory issues and difficulty focusing. Jake attempted to report his findings to federal authorities, but his complaints were dismissed as stress-related hallucinations or equipment malfunction, since the research facility was officially listed as a renewable energy monitoring station. The acoustic equipment was classified as atmospheric research instruments. The cover-up was thorough and sophisticated. The acoustic weapons operated at frequencies that left no detectable traces in the human body. The symptoms were easily explained by stress, exhaustion, or pre-existing medical conditions, and medical examinations of the affected drivers revealed no physical abnormalities. However, Jake possessed one piece of evidence that defied explanation: recordings of the frequency itself. Using specialized equipment borrowed from Dr. Hoffman, he had recorded clear audio of the artificial sound patterns being broadcast along the highway, revealing a complex series of modulated tones that matched the acoustic signature of known military. The frequency wasn't simply a weapons test, it was a complex mind control experiment, with sound patterns intended to affect brainwave activity, potentially changing emotion, behavior, and even decision-making. Dr. Hoffman's analysis validated Jake's darkest concerns. The truckers are ideal test subjects because they are isolated, mobile, and unlikely to be believed if they report strange experiences. Dr. Hoffman clarified that they are not just testing weapons, but also studying how to control human consciousness using sound. Jake stopped driving the affected route, but the damage was already done, and he continued to experience phantom sounds. The most terrifying realization was that the frequency was only one of many similar installations scattered across the American highway system. Jake's research revealed acoustic anomalies along major trucking routes throughout the country, all following the same pattern: wind farms or other industrial facilities that provided radio frequencies. Other drivers reported similar long-term effects, suggesting that the frequency had caused permanent changes to their neurological systems, as well as chronic headaches months after his last exposure. The frequency had demonstrated to Jake that the human mind was far more susceptible than anyone had thought, that sound waves, which were invisible and undetectable to most people, could be used to surgically manipulate, control, and torture human consciousness. And somewhere in the vast network of American highways, those weapons were still in use, still being tested, still robbing innocent drivers of their sanity. The highway had turned into a laboratory, and every trucker who passed through the impacted areas was an unwilling participant in an experiment that pushed the limits of human consciousness to their breaking point. 6. The route that doesn't exist. Eddie Vasquez had been using GPS navigation for more than 10 years, but he'd never been able to escape the knowledge that the frequency was still out there, broadcasting its invisible poison into the minds of other drivers. Jake never drove long hauls again, never came across anything like what happened during his October 2023 delivery run from Houston to El Paso, where his truck's navigation system led him onto a highway that was officially non-existent, a perfectly paved road that didn't show up on any maps, carried no traffic, and led to places that shouldn't have been there. It began as a typical freight haul, and Eddie was following his usual route along Interstate 10 to deliver industrial equipment to a construction site outside El Paso. Although he had driven this highway hundreds of times, his GPS system abruptly recalculated his route somewhere west of San Antonio, directing him to take an exit he had never noticed before. The exit ramp appeared to be a typical highway construction with appropriate signage indicating State Route 447. But Eddie couldn't get rid of the feeling that something wasn't right, because he had been driving Texas highways for 15 years and had never heard of State Route 447. The highway itself was strangely ideal, the asphalt immaculate, the lane markings clear and bright, the roadside vegetation kept with an almost unnatural precision. But there were no other cars, so he followed the directions anyway, since his GPS told him this was the quickest way to his destination. After driving through the Texas countryside for more than an hour without seeing any cars, trucks, or even road maintenance workers, Eddie discovered that his cell phone was dead and his CB radio was only picking up static. What's more worrisome is that the onboard computer in his truck was displaying fuel consumption rates that didn't match his actual fuel gauge. The system said he had been driving for 3 hours, but his fuel level showed only the terrain he was driving through was completely different from anything he had ever seen before. The hills were too steep, the vegetation was too lush, and the rock formations were entirely new. Eddie had been driving for about 90 minutes, and the surroundings were also incorrect. Every side road and exit ramp led to dead ends or looped back to the same highway. The first indication of human presence was a rest stop that popped up around a bend in the road. It appeared to be a typical Texas highway facility, complete with parking lots, restrooms, and a small visitor center. But as soon as Eddie pulled in, he realized that everything was a little off. His GPS insisted that he was on the right route, indicating that his destination was only 50 miles away, but his odometer showed that he had already driven more than 200 meters since taking the mysterious exit. Inside the visitor center, Eddie discovered maps and brochures for tourist attractions he had never heard of. Places with names like Crystal Valley Archaeological Site and Meridian Observatory. Places with photographs of landscapes that looked vaguely familiar but definitely not Texan. But the proportions were off, the doors were a little too wide, the windows were at strange heights, and the parking spaces were marked for vehicles much larger than normal trucks. The photographs of the people who visited these attractions were unnerving. They appeared normal at first glance, but their faces were slightly warped, as if the images had been digitally altered to make the subjects appear a little more generic and anonymous. Eddie attempted to ask the rest stop attendant about State Route 447, but the man appeared perplexed by the question, speaking English with a faint accent that Eddie couldn't identify, and his answers were strangely scripted, as if he were reading from a manual. When Eddie inquired about the odd maps and brochures, the attendant's face went blank. "I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. State Route 447 is a scenic alternative to the main interstate," the attendant explained, offering enhanced travel experiences along with efficient transportation between designated points. "Is there anything else I can do for you today?" Eddie was more perplexed than ever when he left the rest stop, his GPS still directing him along State Route 447, but he was starting to believe that he was in some sort of complex delusion. The highway seemingly going on forever with no indication of where he was supposed to go. The breakthrough came when Eddie noticed the mile markers appeared to be following a complicated mathematical pattern that repeated every 47 miles, rather than increasing in the usual sequence. Eddie realized he had been driving in a loop, but it was so big and subtly curved that he hadn't noticed the repetition until he noticed the surveillance equipment tucked away among the roadside. State Route 447 was part of a large testing facility that was intended to study human navigation and decision-making under controlled conditions. Eddie's investigation showed that the highway was a closed-loop system approximately 300 meters in length, and that the vegetation were advanced cameras, antenna arrays, and sensor devices that were obviously monitoring the highway. The equipment was made to blend in with the natural environment, but Eddie's trained eye picked up the telltale signs of electronic surveillance. Using Eddie and other unwitting test subjects, the facility was testing advanced GPS spoofing technology, systems that could override civilian navigation devices and guide vehicles along predetermined routes, which could have military applications, allowing enemy forces to be misdirected or civilian traffic to be controlled during emergencies. The circumference was designed to look like a typical interstate highway, but was actually a sophisticated laboratory. The most unsettling part of the testing was the psychological component. The facility was examining how long drivers would stick to GPS directions even when their gut told them something was wrong. Their responses to the spoofing technology, their driving behavior under stress, and their capacity to recognize the deception were all being tracked and recorded. The testing facility had developed complex cover stories to explain away any reports of the non-existent highway, and the key to escape was realizing that the entire experience was designed to measure the breaking point where people would abandon technology and rely on their own judgment. Eddie found that he wasn't the first driver to become trapped on State Route 447. Other truckers had reported similar experiences, but their stories were dismissed as fatigue-induced hallucinations or GPS malfunctions. The GPS system, road signs, and even the rest stop attendant were all part of a complex psychological experiment to test obedience to authority. After Eddie realized this, he was able to escape the loop by willfully disregarding his navigation system and going with his gut. Eddie eventually found his way back to Interstate 10, but not before learning that State Route 447 was only one of several phantom highways being used for similar testing. The technology was being deployed across the most horrifyingly. The testing was not restricted to highways, as the same GPS spoofing technology could be used to control civilian navigation in urban areas, potentially steering people away from sensitive locations or toward areas where they could be monitored or influenced. This would create invisible laboratories where human behavior could be studied and manipulated without the subject's knowledge or consent. Knowing that the facility had the means to refute any testimony, he never told authorities about his experience. Instead, he started alerting other truckers via CB radio networks and online forums about the warning signs of phantom highways and GPS manipulation. The route that doesn't exist had demonstrated to Eddie how modern navigation technology could be used as a tool for control and manipulation. And in a society where people had become totally reliant on GPS systems, the ability to override those systems was crucial. The roads we travel may not always lead where we think they're going, and somewhere in the vast network of American highways, phantom routes continued to operate, testing the limits of human trust and the ability of technology to reshape our perception of the world around us. 7. The mirror people. Eddie continued driving, but he never again trusted his GPS completely, because he had learned that reality itself could be reprogrammed in the digital age. When other drivers began reporting the same phenomenon, Stan Kowalski realized he was dealing with something far more disturbing than sleep deprivation. Stan Kowalski had been driving nights for 22 years, but he had never seen anything like what began happening on Interstate 75 through Georgia in the fall of 2023. The first incident happened during a routine run from Atlanta to Jacksonville. He was driving through the pre-dawn darkness when he noticed a figure in his passenger side mirror, which appeared to be in the mirror. The figure continued walking, keeping pace with his 18-wheeler at 65 miles per hour. Stan initially thought it was a trick of the light, but on his way back, he saw more detail. A man in what looked like a workload, walking steadily with a mechanical gait. When Stan looked straight out his window, nothing was there, but the figure continued walking, matching his highway speed perfectly. Stan could see enough detail to know that the figure was unquestionably human-shaped, even though its face was obscured by shadow. He started to hear reports of similar phenomena from other drivers over the CB radio, and the descriptions were remarkably consistent: shadowy figures that were only visible in mirrors, always walking alongside trucks at highway speeds, and always showing up on the same section of Interstate 75 between Moan and Tiffin. The phenomenon became known among truckers as the mirror people, figures that existed only in reflection, following vehicles through a specific section of Georgia highway. Last night, I saw 3 of them, and one driver reported seeing them. They were all walking in formation, as if they were part of some sort of patrol, and I could only see them in the mirrors. When I looked out the windows, nothing was there. The sightings were so frequent that drivers started planning their routes to avoid the area during periods of high activity. After investigating the mirror people, Stan found Dr. Patricia Reeves, a Georgia Tech researcher who specialized in studying optical illusions and perceptual anomalies, who had been recording similar sightings and had formulated a theory explaining them. The sightings usually occurred between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning. Dr. Reeves added, "Your brain is interpreting random visual stimuli as human figures, but the effect is being enhanced by something in the local environment. What you're seeing is a type of pareidolia that is intensified by particular environmental factors." According to Dr. Reeves' research, the impacted highway segment went through a region with peculiar electromagnetic characteristics. The mystery was further complicated when Stan learned that the mirror people were not merely hallucinations, but rather exhibited consistent behaviors and characteristics. Several drivers reported seeing the same figures in the same places, indicating that whatever was causing the phenomenon was highly organized and predictable. Underground mineral deposits and a nearby military communications facility created a complex field of electromagnetic interference that could affect both electronic equipment and human perception. The breakthrough came when Stan met a retired military engineer named Colonel James Mitchell, who had worked on classified projects involving stealth. The results were shocking. The mirror people showed up on infrared imaging with heat signatures that matched human body temperature, but they were invisible to conventional cameras when Stan attempted to film them directly. What you're seeing are test subjects for experimental camouflage technology, Mitchell explained, recognizing the phenomenon right away. The military has been working on systems that can make personnel invisible to most forms of detection, but the technology has limitations. It can fool direct observation and the majority of camera systems, but it cannot totally remove infrared signatures or reflective qualities. Mitchell's explanation exposed the horrifying reality that the mirror people were actual people dressed in sophisticated camouflage suits that effectively made them invisible to the naked eye by bending light around the wearer using electromagnetic field manipulation and metamaterials. Stan's infrared recordings provided vital proof of the stealth technology in action. However, the technology was unable to account for all types of optical reflection, which is why the figures were still visible in mirrors. The test subjects were military personnel using the remote highway as a testing ground for a field trials of the stealth technology, practicing covert surveillance and reconnaissance while remaining undetected while observing civilian traffic patterns. However, the technology had unexpected side effects, as the electromagnetic fields produced by the stealth suits were interfering with the brain's visual processing centers, causing drivers to see distorted reflections and phantom images. Images showed human figures wearing bulky suits covered in sophisticated electronic equipment, the suits creating electromagnetic fields that interfered with light wavelengths, making the wearers invisible to most forms of direct observation. According to Dr. Reeves's analysis of Stan's recordings, the stealth technology was effectively weaponizing human perception, and the mirror people were more than just invisible soldiers. They were causing hallucinations and perceptual distortions in everyone they came into contact with. The electromagnetic fields could be tuned to specific frequencies that would cause confusion, disorientation, and the psychological effects on drivers were severe. Many reported persistent anxiety, sleep disturbances, and recurrent nightmares about being watched by invisible figures. Some developed chronic paranoia, convinced that they were being followed by people they couldn't see. And the technology wasn't just making soldiers invisible, it was making civilians see things that weren't there. Medical examinations of the affected drivers revealed no physical abnormalities. The electromagnetic interference could be explained as a natural phenomenon caused by geological formations. The military testing program was classified at the highest levels, and the cover-up was thorough and sophisticated. Stan attempted to report his findings to federal authorities, but his complaints were dismissed as stress-related hallucinations or equipment malfunction. Stan had recorded unmistakable evidence of invisible human figures conducting surveillance operations on public highways, proving that the stealth technology existed, was being tested on innocent civilians, and was seriously harming people's mental health. The infrared signatures could be written off as equipment malfunctions or atmospheric anomalies. The mirror people phenomenon was particularly unsettling because of its implications for the future of surveillance and warfare. If the military could make soldiers completely invisible while also making observers experience hallucinations, then traditional notions of security and privacy would be rendered meaningless. Stan stopped driving the affected route, but he couldn't shake the feeling that invisible watchers were still operating their clandestine operations along America's highways. Stan never trusted his mirrors again, having learned that in the modern world, what you couldn't see was far more dangerous than what you could see. He believed that reality itself could be manipulated, that technology beyond his comprehension could fool the human eye, and that the stealth technology was eventually deployed in other locations, leading to new reports of mirror people and phantom figures along major trucking routes throughout the country. The invisible soldiers were everywhere, carrying out their covert missions while driving civilian populations to the brink of madness. The weight that follows Rick Donovan had been transporting heavy machinery for 16 years, but he had never come across a load that seemed to get heavier during transport. It began in September 2022, when Rick picked up what seemed to be a routine shipment of industrial equipment from a warehouse in the city. Invisible figures might be watching, waiting, and testing the limits of human perception with technology that turned reality into a battlefield where no one was safe from the eyes they couldn't see. Michigan. Rick's loaded truck weighed 78,500 pounds, including his tractor and trailer. The manifest stated that the cargo was precision manufacturing components, weighing precisely 34,000 pounds, well within his truck's legal weight limit. The first weigh station verified that the manifest was correct, but by the time he arrived at the second weigh station, which was only 150 miles down the road, an impossible situation had occurred. Rick initially believed it was a scale malfunction, but the weigh station operator confirmed the equipment was working normally, and other trucks were weighing in at their expected loads. Rick's truck was the only one that displayed the mysterious weight gain, now weighing 81,200 pounds, an increase of 7,700 pounds, without adding any cargo. Must be moisture or something, the operator suggested. The weight kept growing as Rick drove south, with his truck weighing hundreds of pounds more at each weigh station than the one before, until he reached the Tennessee border, where it weighed over 85,000 pounds. Rick knew that was impossible because the cargo area was sealed and the weather had been dry 4 days. Truckers carrying certain kinds of cargo were experiencing unexplained weight gains during transport, a phenomenon that seemed to affect only certain shipments, all coming from the same industrial region in Michigan. Rick heard similar reports from other drivers over the CB radio, putting him at risk of massive fines and license suspension. One driver claimed to have picked up a load of what they claimed was computer equipment. After doing some research, Rick contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, a material scientist at the University of Chicago, who specialized in researching unusual material properties. Dr. Chen had been recording reports of objects that appeared to defy standard physics, such as materials that changed mass. Started at 32,000. Now I'm showing 38,000. Doe's going to have my head if I hit another scale. Dr. Chen clarified that the mysterious cargo wasn't typical, saying, "What you're describing sounds like smart materials undergoing phase transitions. Experimental substances can change their density and mass in response to environmental conditions, temperature, pressure, electromagnetic fields, and even vibration. Industrial machinery, experimental materials for military use, substances that, under certain circumstances, could drastically change their physical properties, were being transported to testing facilities where their special qualities would be assessed, and the weight gain was due to the materials reacting to the vibrations and electromagnetic fields produced by the truck while in transit. Though the process was invisible and imperceptible to human senses, Rick found that the materials weren't simply getting heavier, but rather were somehow drawing mass from their surroundings, essentially stealing atoms from the air and incorporating them into their own structure. The continuous motion and electrical systems were causing a molecular restructuring process that increased the material's density and mass. But the phenomenon was far more complex than simple phase transitions. Dr. Chen's analysis of air samples from Rick's trailer revealed alarming evidence of the mass conversion process, and the atmosphere inside the cargo area showed unusual isotopic ratios and molecular structures that indicated large-scale atomic manipulation was taking place. The materials were literally growing heavier by consuming the environment around them, turning atmospheric gases into solid matter through a process that defied conventional understanding of physics. According to Dr. Chen, they are essentially atomic vampires, absorbing matter from their surroundings and turning it into their own mass. Without specialist equipment, the process is absolutely undetected and extremely efficient. The ramifications were horrifying. The materials might be able to consume whatever kind of matter they came into contact with, and that they were able to transform ambient gases into solid matter. Rick was gaining weight, but that was only the start. In essence, reality itself was being eaten away by the materials. According to Rick's investigation, the materials came from a classified military program that was creating self-replicating construction materials and armor. By consuming environmental material, the materials were made to mend and fortify themselves, producing machinery that could actually get stronger. While fighting, however, the uncontrolled expansion of the substance during transportation was not foreseen by the military. The materials started their molecular rearrangement before they arrived at their destination, because to the vibrations and electromagnetic fields produced by trucks, which were starting the consumption process too soon. The most unsettling finding was that the components were starting to have an impact on the truck itself, in addition to consuming gases. The metal parts of Rick's trailer became lighter and more brittle as the materials absorbed atoms from the truck's structure, indicating molecular degradation. In essence, the phenomena was converting Rick's truck into fuel for the test items. The weight gain was a representation of stuff moving from the truck to the load, a process that, if permitted to continue, would eventually use up the entire vehicle. Dr. Chen's investigation showed that catastrophic equipment failures had occurred for other drivers carrying comparable goods. As the experimental materials consumed their atomic structure during transportation, trucks had physically disintegrated. Atomic cannibalism was the true source of the occurrences, which were disguised as structural collapse or metal fatigue. When Rick attempted to submit his results to the Department of Transportation, his grievances were rejected as either documentation errors or scale calibration issues. The experimental materials were deemed essential to the nation's defense, and the military program was classified at the highest levels. It was a smart and extensive cover-up Normal weights were displayed by correcting the weigh station records. No signs of structural damage were discovered during truck inspections. Despite being exposed to materials that were literally rewriting the rules of physics, the impacted driver's medical checks revealed no health issues. Rick, however, had written evidence of the atomic consumption process. His recordings revealed unmistakable weight growth that defied explanation by standard physics. There were the materials, in addition to endangering the structural stability of the trucks transporting them. They were consuming matter while in transit. The phenomenon's potential for unchecked growth was its most scary feature. If the resources could devour metal constructions and air gases, their growth was theoretically limitless. In an uncontrollable chain reaction, they might devour entire cities and transform matter into more of themselves. Rick was unable to shake the feeling that the weight that follows was still out there, getting heavier by the mile, but he refused to carry any more enigmatic freight. Other drivers, unaware that they were transporting compounds capable of rewriting the fundamental laws of reality, were transporting the experimental materials. Atomic vampires were spreading around the highways of America, transported by gullible truckers who believed they were transporting normal goods. Every cargo represented a risk of catastrophe. If the consumption process got out of hand, the load could actually devour everything in its path. Rick never again put his trust in his scales. He had discovered that weight was no longer a fixed factor in the contemporary environment. Depending on factors beyond human understanding, it could rise, fall, or vanish completely. Trucks were transporting stuff that defied the rules of physics somewhere on the roadways of America. One atom at a time, reality was being devoured by the weight that followed, which was getting heavier by the mile. The nap epidemic. Marcus Williams has never experienced a micro-nap episode in 14 years of driving long-haul ways. He took satisfaction in being aware of his limitations, taking appropriate pauses, and never driving past the hours that are safe for him. However, in 2023 winter, on Interstate 40 in New Mexico, something changed. Even though Marcus was completely rested, he started nodding off while driving. He wasn't by himself either. During a normal route from Albuquerque to Amarillo, the first incident occurred. Marcus felt fully awake when he started driving to getting 8 hours of sleep the night before. However, he awoke someplace close to Santa Rosa, behind the wheel that has no recollection of the last 20 minutes. He had no memory whatsoever of driving that section of highway, yet his truck was still in its lane, cruise control on. At first, Marcus thought it was stress or coffee withdrawal, but on his way back, the same thing occurred. This time, while traveling through the same location, he lost almost 30 minutes of his recollection. The accurate notes were recorded in his own handwriting in his logbook. However, he was unable to recall creating them. Marcus started to hear other vehicles reporting similar incidents over the CB radio. Truckers named it the Santa Rosa Slumber Zone since the event was so common. Despite getting enough sleep, drivers reported falling asleep, losing large portions of their memories, and discovering proof of actions they couldn't recall taking. Yesterday, I lost 45 minutes, and I reported one over the CB as a driver. I woke up in a truck stop, but I can't recall ever going to. I bought fuel, had a break, and even spoke to other drivers, according to my logbook, but I don't recall any of that. The consistency of the reports was striking. Drivers would go into something like profound slumber and still be able to drive. Rest spots would be where they would park, engage with others and carry out difficult activities while seemingly unconscious. They wouldn't remember anything they did during the sleep episode when they woke up. Dr. Jennifer Okafor, a sleep specialist at the University of New Mexico, was the result of Marcus's inquiry. She had been recording uncommon sleep abnormalities in the area. A group of cases exhibiting automatic behavior while sleeping, a condition in which people carry out intricate tasks while unconscious, had been discovered by Okafor. Dr. Okafor clarified, "What you're describing sounds like an extreme form of somnambulism. However, the phenomenon's specificity and magnitude point to an environmental trigger. These sleep stages are being brought on by something there in several people." According to Dr. Okafor's research, the impacted highway segment travel through a region with peculiar atmospheric conditions. Certain air pressure patterns and altitude electromagnetic fields from adjacent radio towers were combining to create the ideal environment for inducing sleep. However, the situation became more complex when Marcus learned that the sleep episodes weren't arbitrary. During their unconscious moments, drivers were engaged in certain duties. Tasks that appeared well-planned and intentional, truck stops, reported drivers making unexpected purchases, filling out papers, and even partaking in discussions they later couldn't remember. Marcus made the discovery after meeting Dr. Robert Steinberg, a neurologist. Dr. Steinberg had been looking at claims of mass sleep induction in a number of southwest areas. "It is not natural somnambulism that you are experiencing," Dr. Steinberg said, "that guided electromagnetic waves that target particular brainwave patterns are being used to artificially generate the sleep episodes. Drivers are actually being put to sleep and then programmed by someone, their actions." According to Dr. Steinberg's research, the impacted region had a network of covert transmitters that could send out electromagnetic signals that were specifically calibrated to interfere with regular brain activity. The impulses might block the creation of memories, induce sleep states, or even implant basic behavioral commands. Large-scale behavioral tests on unwary drivers were being carried out using the technology. The drivers were being led through preset tasks while unconscious in order to assess the electromagnetic mind control's efficacy. Their chats, purchases, and route decisions were all being tracked and examined. Marcus found the sleep induction technique to be extremely complex. It might use biometric scanning and license plate identification to target certain cars, guaranteeing that particular drivers will have sleep episodes at pre-selected locations. Even the system could coordinate several drivers to carry out coordinated tasks while unconscious. The scale of the study was its most unsettling feature. New Mexico was not the only state experiencing a sleep epidemic. In the Southwest, similar transmitter networks had been found along important freight routes. Unknowingly, thousands of drivers were being exploited as test subjects in research that went against every human rights and informed consent standard. According to Dr. Steinberg's findings, the driver's brain chemistry was being permanently altered by electromagnetic sleep induction. Chronic weariness, memory issues, and heightened vulnerability to hypnotic suggestion were the results of prolonged exposure. People weren't just falling asleep thanks to the gadgets. Their neurological circuits were being rewired by it. Marcus used recording equipment in an attempt to capture his experiences. However, the electromagnetic electronic devices were disrupted by fields. Cameras would break down. GPS devices would display locations that aren't conceivable during sleep periods, and audio recorders would simply create static. It was a really sophisticated cover-up. Affected drivers' medical evaluations revealed symptoms that were typical of sleep loss. The electromagnetic emitters pretended to be radio equipment and cell phone towers. The behavioral experiments were described as driver behavior research and traffic pattern studies. However, Marcus had one piece of evidence that defied explanation: time-stamped invoices and records of his unconscious actions. The receipts documented transactions he couldn't recall, talks he couldn't recall, and routes he couldn't recall taking. According to Dr. Steinberg's research, the sleep induction technique was used in a classified military program that looked into crowd control and electromagnetic weapons. Because the trucks followed well-known routes through remote locations where studies could be carried out covertly, they made ideal test subjects. The fact that the technology may be expanded to impact entire populations was the most horrifying finding. The same electromagnetic fields that put individual drivers to sleep might be dispersed over vast regions, possibly rendering entire cities unconscious, so that their actions could be managed. Marcus stopped operating the impacted routes, but the consequences of his exposure to the sleep induction system persisted. He experienced memory loss, persistent sleeplessness, and a lack of confidence in his own senses. Similar long-term problems were described by other impacted drivers. Marcus had learned from the sleep epidemic that consciousness itself was more brittle than he had previously thought. Human awareness may be turned on and off like a light bulb with the correct technology, making humans susceptible to unfathomable manipulation and control. The sleep induction transmitters were still in use somewhere on the highways of America, lulling gullible drivers into unconsciousness and turning them into puppets in trials they would never recall. There was the technology. There was no way to predict when or where the next sleep episode would take place, and it was being tested on civilian populations. Marcus lost all faith in his own recollection. He had discovered that sleep was not a normal state of rest in the contemporary environment. It might be used to manipulate, weaponize, and transform people into programmable machines. One motorist at a time, the sleep pandemic continued to spread over the American Southwest's interminable roadways. 10 The road that remembers. In his 19 years of transporting cargo throughout the Pacific Northwest, Tony Ramirez had never come across a section of highway that appeared to absorb knowledge from each passing car. Beginning in the spring of 2024, it traveled through Oregon's Columbia River Gorge or a recently resurfaced portion of Interstate 84. The surface of the road appeared normal. Even though the black tarmac was smooth and had clear yellow lines, Tony's tires felt off from the first instant. The handling of his truck was the first indication of problems. Even with ideal weather and a well-kept car, Tony's equipment started acting strangely. To his steering inputs, the truck pulled slightly, in unexpected directions, as if anticipating his moves. At first, it was hardly perceptible, but with every mile, it became more evident. When Tony arrived at the Hood River exit, his truck was essentially operating on its own. With an unusual precision, the steering wheel would turn in his hands. As it followed the curves of the road, the truck resisted Tony's attempts to shift lanes, seemingly because the road surface was holding onto his tires, directing his course. Other drivers on the same section of roadway reported similar incidents over the CB radio. Regardless of their steering inputs, truckers reported feeling as though an outside force was controlling their cars and pulling them along preset routes. One driver said, "It's like the road knows where I'm supposed to go. I attempted to exit through the Cascade locks, but my truck just continued in a straight line." The steering seemed to be fixed in place. Drivers grew to refer to the phenomena as the smart road, a segment of highway that appeared to actively direct cars along predetermined routes. However, the direction wasn't arbitrary. It seemed as though the road was learning from traffic patterns and optimizing routes according to some unidentified standards. Dr. Amanda Forster, a materials engineer at Oregon State University with expertise in smart infrastructure systems, was the result of Tony's inquiry. Dr. Forster had been researching stories of real-time adaptive pavement that could react to traffic situations. Dr. Forster clarified, "What you're describing sounds like experimental smart road technology, prototypes that may modify their surface characteristics in response to traffic are currently under development. Patterns, meteorological circumstances, and car attributes." According to Dr. Foster's investigation, the resurfaced portion of I-84 had microscopic sensors, actuators, and experimental materials implanted in the asphalt that could track and affect vehicle behavior. By giving drivers subtle direction, the device was intended to enhance traffic flow and lower accident rates. However, the system had developed beyond its initial configuration. By gathering information on each car that went by them, the embedded Sensors were able to identify patterns in decision-making, driver behavior, and preferred routes. In essence, the road was using traffic data to create its own artificial intelligence. Tony learned that the smart road was more than just a way to direct traffic. It was attempting to optimize their paths and forecast their destinations. That the system gained unparalleled insight into travel trends and driver intents thanks to its access to GPS data, electronic toll records, and even mobile phone signals. The road was starting to take precedence over human judgment, which was the most unsettling feature when drivers attempted to stray from the routes suggested by the system. Their cars physically resisted their commands. Vehicles could be pulled in particular directions by forces created by the road surface's selective increase or decrease in friction. According to Dr. Forster's investigation, magnetohalological materials, substances that may alter their characteristics in reaction to electromagnetic fields, were used in the smart road technology. On a molecular level, the road might really change its shape, forming pathways and channels that would direct cars down preset paths. The highly advanced technology may make real-time adjustments depending on the amount of traffic, the weather, and specifics of each car. By using their tire patterns, weight distribution, and electromagnetic signatures, it could recognize particular trucks and offer tailored advice for every car. However, unanticipated behaviors had been produced by the road's learning algorithms. The system started giving some cars priority over others, giving some drivers preferred routes, while making it harder for others to move. In essence, it was the formation of biases and preferences based on trends it has seen in the data. The smart road was a component of a wider network of experimental infrastructure initiatives, according to Tony's inquiry. In the Pacific Northwest, similar technology was being tested on highways to build a linked network of roads that could control traffic flow over great distances and communicate with one another. The road system's ability to be designed to steer cars to particular destinations against the driver's will was the most horrifying finding. Responders reported instances in which unmarked officials had diverted vehicles from their planned routes to isolated locations where they were inspected, searched, or detained. According to Dr. Forster's study, smart road technology has the potential to be used for mass traffic control, which may involve rerouting whole populations during civil disturbances or emergencies. People might be essentially imprisoned in their cars under the system, which would require them to drive only on authorized routes to authorized locations. When Tony attempted to capture his adventures on the smart road, the system purposefully tampered with his recording devices. Pointing cameras at the road surface would cause them to malfunction. Electronic gadgets would encounter inexplicable power fluctuations, and GPS systems would display locations that were unattainable. It was a smooth and elegant cover-up. In order to improve traction, the smart road technology was described as experimental surface treatments, resilience. The impacts of the vehicle guidance were written off as a result of equipment failure or driver imagination. Official documentation never made reference to the system's capacity for learning and adaptation. However, Tony had tangible proof of the road's impact. Unusual tire wear patterns on his truck were consistent with the magnetic navigation system. Data logs from his car's electronic systems revealed outside inputs that were not consistent with regular driving circumstances. Tony had learned from the smart road that the highway infrastructure itself could be used as a means of manipulation and control. Now, the roads he had trusted for 19 years could track his travels, forecast his destinations, and make him go only in the directions the system desired. The field of technology was growing quickly, with new smart road installations popping up on the nation's main freight routes. Every piece of experimental pavement was linked to an extensive network that was developing the ability to regulate and guide human movement on a never-before-seen scale. Eventually, Tony discovered other routes that did not use the smart road system, but he was aware that his mobility was become more and more restricted. The highways were keeping track of every car that went by them, creating intricate driver's characteristics and behaviors. Somewhere within the extensive system of the road that remembers, the American highways kept evolving and changing, becoming increasingly advanced with every car that goes by. The actual asphalt had grown intelligent, and it was, 1 mile at a time, transforming human behavior with that intelligence. Tony never once more had faith in the roads. He had discovered that in today's world, even the earth beneath his wheels might be observing, picking up knowledge, and managing his each motion. The highway system was developing into an autonomous entity, and its ideas were become more and more foreign to the people who traversed it.